Professor Greene has been on the faculty of Teachers College at Columbia since 1965. Her courses have dealt with philosophy and the history of education, social philosophy, aesthetic education, and literature. She has held the William F. Russell Chair in the Foundations of Education since 1975, and she continues as Professor of Philosophy and Education to work in interdisciplinary fields. Before coming to Teachers College, she taught at Montclair State College, New York University, Brooklyn College, and the University of New York. She's lectured widely at universities and educational associations throughout the United States, past president of the Philosophy of Education Society and the American Educational Studies Associations, past president of the AERA. She's received numerous academic awards, including the Delta Gamma Kappa Award for the Educational Book of the Year for Teacher, A Stranger, 1974, and 2 Phi Delta Kappa Teacher of the Year awards. She's the author of many journal articles and chapters, as well as volumes called The Existential Encounters for Teachers, The Public School and the Private Vision, Landscapes of Learning. Her more recent works include Dialectic of Freedom and Releasing Imagination, both texts from which we read in the core course. She holds honorary degrees from Lehigh University, Hofstra University, and the Bank Street College of Education. She is the single luminary in the United States of America. Get ready. I'm so honored she's here. We're so honored she's here. I'm going to take it. I did not say, I'm saying luminary. She is the single brightest luminary on the field of aesthetic education, and she continues to inspire and to inform all of us. Please join me in welcoming Maxine Greene.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, all those wonderful words, and I'm quivering. I'm very, very happy to be asked back and very glad to be here and to try to make some sense about the arts and aesthetic education and guitars. Last night, I don't know if I was telling Jessica, and you may have heard it too, I was listening to Charlie Rose, and he was interviewing Dustin Hoffman. And Dustin Hoffman became very emotional because he said, what's the good of art? What's the use of art? And he talked about looking at the children in the Columbine school walking toward the camera, and then looking at the refugees in Kosovo walking toward the camera. And he said, it's the same. It's all one family. And then he said, and then he said, at least art gives a face to these people. I don't know if that's enough to say, but it was the desperation in his voice that I think moved me. What is the use of art? And then in the New Yorker, which came yesterday, and some of you may have seen this, there's a piece by Milan Kundera, and it's called Such Was Their Wager, and it's about Theresienstadt. Remember the camp where Europe's great musicians, painters, writers were imprisoned, and where more than 80,000 of them went from there to Auschwitz and were killed. And he's talking about the number of great artists who were there. It is not only the art created at Theresienstadt that leaves us awestruck. Perhaps even more it is that thirst for cultural life, that thirst for art deployed by the members of the Theresienstadt community who in dreadful circumstances still attended plays and concerts and exhibitions. What was art for them? A way of claiming the full array of emotions, of ideas, of sensations, so that life should not be reduced to the single dimension of horror. And for the artists, inevitably, they saw their fate as entwined with the fate of modern art, called degenerate, hunted down, ridiculed, condemned to death. And then he goes on to talk about how crucial that was, the people who were lost and the art to which they devoted themselves. So when you think of that, people on the edge of destruction, keeping art alive. Maybe we can find some of the answers to the question: why talk about art at a time of massacre in so many places? I don't know the answer. I'm sure no one does, but people have been looking for it, as you know, for a long, long time. Blue guitars, unexpected in the way they look and sound, have offered themselves for transmutation into metaphor, not only to Wallace Stevens, the poet, but to David Hockney, the painter, to the novelist and essayist William Gass, entitling a collection of his writing Blue. And there are blue velvet and blue denim and the blues. Any of us might go on summoning up shapes and colors that surprise us in their interweavings, in what they bring to mind, in how they make us feel. Stevens' poem, The Man with the Blue Guitar, begins, "They said you have a blue guitar. You do not play things as they are." The man replied, "Things as they are changed upon the blue guitar." And they said then, "But play you must, a tune beyond us, yet ourselves, a tune upon the blue guitar of things exactly as they are." Throughout the poem, there is that tension between the desire to see beyond, to unconceal, as the philosopher said, and the desire to remain at home, immersed in the familiar, the everyday, the comfortable. The guitarist charges his listeners after a while to throw away the lights, the definitions, and say what you see in the dark, that it is this or that, but do not use the rotted names. He is asking them to look through their own eyes, to find their own voices, to break with slogans and formulas. And at the end, you as you are, the blue guitar surprises you. Imagination, metaphor, they have to do with reorienting consciousness, with opening new perspectives on the lived world. And yes, with wondering at, questioning the frameworks imposed by existing authorities or by the media, or let us say the culture of the mall. I do not necessarily mean crashing through the frameworks of the boundaries. I mean naming what surrounds and presses down, recognizing that they are constructs, sometimes, as Blake said, man-made manacles, sometimes provisional, open to remaking in the midst of conversation, dialogue, among those striving to see, to understand. And I can't help free associating to Joseph Conrad, writing that the function of the arts is to enable one to see, finding encouragement, consolation, fear, charm, all you demand, and perhaps that glimpse of truth for which you have forgotten to ask. There is another poem, this one by Rita Dove, formerly poet laureate, called The First Book. It suggests the ambivalence we often feel when faced with new beginnings, or perhaps the risk of entering on an unfamiliar landscape or work of art. Open it, go ahead, it won't bite, well, maybe a little, more than a nip, a tingle. It's pleasurable, really. You see, it keeps on opening. You may fall in. Sure, it's hard to get started. Remember learning to use a knife and fork? Dig in. You'll never reach bottom. It's not like it's the end of the world, just the world as you think you know it. The wonderful and the recognizable part of that poem for me has to do with the suggestion of inexhaustibility, of never reaching the bottom when it comes to learning or encountering or making a work of art. Indeed, encounters with works of art are paradigms where this is concerned. Every time I read a novel of any depth, Anna Karenina, say, or The House of Mirth, or The Great Gatsby, or Invisible Man, and the other day, for the 15th time, I guess, The Bluest Eye, and reread them, I'm bound to discover something new. It may happen because the dialogue, the book aroused, made me see through many eyes, and not simply my own. Or it may be that different images, different meanings are tapped in my experience. I have the wonderful feeling of incompleteness, the feeling that there is always, always more. And that keeps me fascinated, curious, stirred to look closer, to discover more, to connect. Think of paintings. Some of us were lucky enough to see the Monet show in Montreal last week, the ones primarily done in the gardens at Giverny. We saw the power of light, the haze, the glow, the ground that seems tremulous with sun and color and shadow, much that we had not seen before. I need not mention some of the great ballets, or Balanchine's work, or Martha Graham's. Could you ever get enough of Graham's Lamentations, for instance, or her Appalachian Spring, or Alvin Ailey's Revelations, or Twyla Thorpe's Sinatra songs? Or is it possible to leave the magic flute and say, well, I've done the magic flute, and now it's time for Stravinsky or Carter or Duke Ellington? I think of what I missed in the Bonnard paintings, which were at the Modern Museum last summer, which I always dismissed as pictures of bourgeois interiors like my mother's house. And then suddenly, when the Bonnard show was at the Modern Museum, and maybe I'd learned enough to attend differently, to see the half-shadowed figures in doorways, the clash of afternoon sunshine and genteel shadows in the living room, and those amazing pictures of his wife in the bathtub, making me become aware that what is really said oftentimes is said by means of images and color and painstakingly rendered wallpaper. The visual memory of a bathtub with a steely glow and mist, and the look of the bathtub like a coffin or a container of holy water, like an object of desire. And then there were the many self-portraits in bathroom mirrors. And why not bathroom mirrors? I move with the shades and nuances of gray, of blue, the renderings of cold tiles. And I ask whether that isn't where we find ourselves each day, or try not to look at ourselves. And we see ourselves in search of that hidden truth of which Conrad spoke. And then, perhaps not so strangely, I think of the Doll's House and that amazing rendering a while ago with Janet McTeer, the English actress who found more and more and still more in the account of Nora and the trap she was in, a fearfully money-haunted moral code, a place of silencing, but ironically a husband to which she was sexually and not only legally bound. Some of you remember that moment when Nora opens the door, leaving behind her husband and children, going forth to claim her rights, to become, as she put it, human. And then there's a play I just saw, and some of you have heard of, called Wit, about an English professor dying of cancer and a world opening up even as her life ends. When I think of what many of our predecessors called a learning community, and what I believe should be a central role for the arts in making possible a new, grounded, risk-taking participation in such a community, I think of it as a community in the making that suggests, Dewey always said that democracy was a community in the making, but it suggests individuals, diverse individuals, coming together, each one in process, each one in search, coming together as who they are and not what they are, since what they are seems to be reduced to a category of human resources, resources for the build-up of what, the free market or globalization or the World Bank or all those things I don't understand, and more technologies with little attention paid to human persons, always in process, always yearning toward fulfilling possibilities as they in the community take form. I'm moved to turn to Dewey for another moment because of a comment he makes in The Public and Its Problems. He was talking about the importance of the arts in human communication, and he made the point that our conscious life of opinion and judgment often proceeds on a superficial and trivial plane. But our lives reach a deeper level, he said. The function of art has always been to break through the crust of conventionalized and routine consciousness. Common things, a flower, a gleam of moonlight, the song of a bird, not things rare and remote, are means by which the deeper levels of life are touched so that they spring up as desire and thought. This process is art. Poetry, the drama, the novel are proofs that the problem of presentation is not insoluble. Artists have always been the real purveyors of the news. Not bad, is that? For it is not the outward happening in itself which is new, but the kindling by it of emotion, perception, and appreciation. I would put particular stress on emotion and perception, so often ignored when we talk about conversation or dialogue and the building of community. And I would also stress the significance of reflective understanding and engagement with particular art forms if we're to expect the problem of what Dewey called the problem of presentation to be solved. If the participants in a learning community are to believe that the artists are the true purveyors of the news, they have on some level to experience what poetry can convey. Sculpture, oil painting, dance, music, for all the hesitancy, for all the ambivalence they may feel. It's important to hold in mind as well Dewey's concern with desire. When he speaks of the deeper levels of life being touched so that they spring up as desire and thought, he is talking about desire as a reaching toward an end in view, perhaps an ideal. He's talking about imagination opening a space for striving, for reaching beyond, for looking at things as if they could be otherwise. Surely you can remember the moments of reading with the flashlight under the sheet, of going to a museum for the first time, of seeing your first ballet, or hearing your first clarinet, or the beat of jazz, or your first World Series game, and the look of the pitcher. All depends on who you are and what you are coming to love. It's not surprising that Dewey and other educators use the term eros to describe the desire, belonging, that moves people to become different, to go beyond where they are. I would like to feel learning communities taking shape in part through the desires of young persons and their teachers to come together in their diversity, to make meaning in their variously lived worlds. The Afro-Americans, the Native Americans, the Chicanos, those excluded and silenced for so long, the children of immigrants, of boat people, of refugees from tyranny and suffering. Those are the ones who so often choose to be learners, if it makes sense to them at least to pay heed, to look at the leaves and the sky and the walls, to hear the voices and the wind, to find ways of making their own imprints on the walls, on the world around, even as they absorb what they think of as the American dream, what Henry James called the money grope, the consumerism, and all the rest. Here, too, we want to touch in some manner the deeper level, to go beyond or below the superficial and the trivial or the taken for granted values of our pecuniary and violent and multiplex society. I don't, like the rest of you, and like I suggested at the beginning, I'm haunted and so troubled by the violence we're hearing about and the violence we just saw in Colorado. And I don't know the answer any more than anyone else knows. But I do think that one of the one of the fruits of diversity, of hearing different voices, may be a way of defending against the terrible problem of an affinity group, talking to people who think the same way you do, and not listening to voices of the community. It was a kind of coincidence. I used to teach Andre Gide's The Counterfeiters, which is about a league of strong men, kids who create a gang. At the end, a little boy, Boris, is tricked into committing suicide. And I was it was funny, but the first talk of the town in the New Yorker has to do with Gide and the Counterfeiters. It's not the first time this has happened, but it does seem to me that the diversity we're struggling for, we're striving for, something that can break through the hot closeness of the affinity group, may have something to do with what's wrong. I don't know any more than anyone else, but I think the idea of community, the idea of diversity, and the idea of breaking through the crust of conventionality all somehow or another create a significant triad. I agree with the philosopher who believes in what he calls the philosophic centrality of the imagination. For it is through imagination, he writes, the realm of pure possibility, that we freely make ourselves to be who or what we are, that we creatively and imaginatively become and merely are. As Emily Dickinson put it, the possible slow fuse is lit by the imagination. Dewey, pointing out a half a century ago that the results of our work in psychology and social science did not have results adequate to the activity, I don't know if I should apologize for saying that, wrote that the reason was a lack of imagination in generating leading ideas and a fear of speculative ideas. Then he said, doing an immense amount of specialized work in the region of facts, we forget that such facts are only data, that they are only fragmentary, uncompleted meanings, and unless they are rounded out into complete ideas, a work which can only be done by hypotheses, by a free imagination of intellectual possibilities, they are as helpless as all main things and as repellent as our needlessly thwarted ones. As I try to make the point that reflective encounters with the several arts may release imagination and allow it more play in the lived world, more opportunity to complete incompleted meanings about young people, let's say, and their uncertainties and their excesses and their fears and their darkness, about the true deprivations of poverty, about single mothers, about the multiple facets of literacy, about sexuality, about the ubiquity of violence and whatever remedies are in sight. I want to keep before me the recognition of imagination as a cognitive activity, a generative activity that opens us in unpredictable ways to our lived situations with all their deficiencies, opening spaces for new dialogue, new conversation about what is lacking, what ought to be repaired, what can be transformed. I want to keep alive the images of incompleteness, images of submergence in the conventional and the ordinary, images of banality, fixity, and what Dewey called the anesthetic, meaning the opposite of aesthetic, moving us to repair and go beyond. Thinking this way, I began looking for a metaphor for the kind of curriculum that would or might offer a range of perspectives, adventures in many provinces of inquiry, from many vantage points, all in a collaborative effort to make sense of a changing, sometimes threatening world. How can we infuse our classrooms with regard for imagination and a desire for a multiplicity of visions, the alternative possibilities the arts can offer? How can we provide occasions for moving intelligently on what is called the information highway and move beyond the facts that mark the way, discovering the empty places and the places which have become sites of social suffering, the spaces somehow or another we might transform. There was an article in the New York Times 2 weeks or so ago written by Herbert Mouchon. I don't know how to say his name. He's the architecture editor, critic of the Times. And it was in the arts and leisure section, and it did provide me a metaphor for the kind of learning, seeking, asking, wondering, inquiring I have in mind. He was talking about a walk he had taken through contemporary Berlin, and he noted at the beginning a tradition of walking through the city that began under the Weimar Republic. He spoke of looking through the lenses of different art movements as he walked, paying heed he could attend to bustling crowds, shop windows, signs, movie houses, hotel lobbies, cafes, handbills, rustling newspapers, cars and trams, and the accelerating pace of urban change. And then there was the sight of surviving monuments from before and during the Nazi period, a rebuilt Jewish synagogue, American structures and franchises, the old centers of learning, the modern and postmodern designs. The city became more than a spectacle as he walked. Opening on all sides, it turned into a school, a university for introducing diverse minds to the modern sensibility and the modern world. The walker keeps searching for the next vista, the next street to cross, the next corner at which to turn. At once he keeps seeking connections to see relationships between the particulars, to identify the cul-de-sac, the dead-end streets that remain to be explored. Mouchon made me recall so many poets of the city: Wordsworth, Baudelaire, Frederick Lorca, Pablo Neruda, Denise Levertov, so many paintings by George Bellows, say, to Romare Reardon, to Frida Kahlo, to Jacob Lawrence, to Red Grooms, and good journalist and critic that he is, he made me aware of what happens when he made me think about what happens when an artist tells what it's like. It happens, and I couldn't resist this association, that I'm reading a very beautiful novel called The Hours by Michael Cunningham, which begins with Virginia Woolf's suicide and goes on to trace her continuing presence in the lives of later women, two especially, Clarissa and Mrs. Brown, called Mrs. Dalloway by a friend, the woman named Clarissa, whose life is suffused by what Virginia Woolf left behind, walks through Greenwich Village on the way to buy flowers for a party she's giving for a famous poet dying of age. She walks through Washington Square, beneath which, she has been told, lay the bones of people buried in the potter's field that was paved over to make the square. Clarissa walks over the dead bodies of the dead as men whisper offers of drugs, not to her, and three black girls whiz past on roller skates, and the old woman sings tunelessly. Clarissa is skittish and jubilant about her luck, her good shoes on sale at Barney's, but still, here, after all, is the sturdy squalor of the park, visible even under its coat of grass and flowers. Here are the drug dealers. Could they kill you if it came to that? And if I lost the page, I'll get hysterical. I usually worry I'll lose page 7, but I didn't. The lunatics, the stunned and baffled, the people whose luck, if they ever had any, has run out. Still, she loves the world for being rude and indestructible, and she knows other people must love it too, poor as well as rich, though no one speaks specifically of the reasons. Why else do we struggle to go on living, no matter how compromised, no matter how harmed? She thinks of the dying like Richard and their reasons for wanting so desperately to live. Then wheels buzzing on concrete, the royal and shock of it, sheets of bright spray blowing from the fountain, as young shirtless men toss a frisbee, and vendors from Peru and Guatemala send pungent, meaty smoke up from their quilted silver carts. A passing radio playing Always Love You as the woman in the dark dress stands under the arch singing. Then Clarissa reaches out beyond that moment to what constitutes the end of the book. We live our lives, do whatever we do, and then we sleep. It's as simple and ordinary as that. A few jump out of windows or drown themselves or take pills. More die by accident, and most of us, the vast majority, are slowly devoured by some disease, or if we're very fortunate, by time itself. There's just this for consolation. And now we're here or there when our lives seem, against all odds and expectations, to burst open and give us everything we've ever imagined, though everyone but children, and perhaps even they, know these hours will inevitably be followed by others far darker and more difficult. Still we cherish the city, the morning. We hope more than anything else for more. I read this, and I'm sorry it was at such length, against Merchant's documentation of his walk through the city, because it suggests so well what art and the work of imagination can do, can transmute, can change the reporter's account of walk through the city. It opens possibilities, to possibility whatever facts we have encountered. It reaches beyond toward a mode of completion, even as it reaches toward thoughts of death. As the Cézanne renderings of the actual Saint-Victoire extend and deepen and complicate what we see when we drive by, what a photograph tells us and a travel poster, makes me think of the Doll's House again, and of romantic paintings like Constables and a road running off into the distance, and paintings of pain and loss like Guernica and Goya's Disasters of War, all of which, when we move into them, lend them our lives, move us beyond stasis to questioning, to reaching beyond where we are. I saw a play the other week based on John Irving's novel, The Cider House Rules. I think some of you have read that. A novel which involved us in all sorts of ways, with life in Boston and on the Maine coast, with women's lives and with decisions to be made between abortion and adoption, where unwanted and unexpected babies were concerned. He has the Dr. Larch in there has a place where babies waiting for adoption are, where women can go for abortions. It's a large, old-fashioned novel, but if you're willing to lend it your life, you can't but find yourself looking through all sorts of male and female perspectives on the lives of men and women and children, and you can't but confront some of the most difficult choices we have to make from new, unexpected angles. Sartre has written about the way in which a novel can address itself to a reader's freedom, perhaps to her indignation, and he said this is most likely to happen when the reader realizes that reading is a synthesis of perception and creation, and Sartre believed this was true with regard to the other arts as well. He wrote that both a subject, a reader, or a perceiver is essential, and so, of course, is an object, a text or a painting or a work of music. The work of art imposes its structures. We must wait for it and observe it as it becomes an object of our experience. The subject, you or I, the reader, has to disclose the text, achieve it as meaningful, as a work of art. In a word, the reader is conscious of disclosing in creating, of creating by disclosing. I can't but remember how attentive I had to be, how I felt that something new was happening in the world when I felt myself collaborate with John Irving, as through his text he was asking me to choose myself again, where abortion was concerned, where adoption is concerned, that I had to keep choosing myself with regard to it in hopes that others' freedom and others' humanity would be protected and nurtured by the choices I might make. In any case, not being able to imagine how a book like that could be translated into a theatrical event, and then I found myself made aware in ways I never could have imagined. The theater critic, again, I seem to read only the Times and the New Yorker. I do read other things. But the theater critic in the Times explained it better than I can. And he said something in the course of doing so that deepened my view of the arts, maybe especially the literary and dramatic arts. The theme of his article had to do with the present interest in narrative and storytelling, and with the ways in which the idea of narrative is carried over to the stage. He said, confrontation brews in a pool of white light. The surrounding area is bare, except for a table holding a few medical implements. A young man denounces a doctor for lies and hypocrisy. The accused regards him with growing annoyance and finally barks, "You damn sullen, self-centered, self-pitying, arrogant, untested, know-nothing adolescent." The audience seems momentarily stunned by the kindly doctor's outburst. After the briefest of pauses, he looks at the audience and he says, "Thought Wilbur Larch." So that it's the change from the ordinary dramatic realism to be found in the presence of the narrator, an omniscient voice at odds with the embodiment of something going on in the present. It's an old tradition, says the critic. I remember it particularly in Middlemarch, you know, the voice of the wise old woman behind what happens, but that interplay between the narrator's point of view and what is happening on the stage, the interplay between the fact and the imagined, between two realities, again reminds me of the significance of the aesthetic experience. It's probably clear, and I don't really have to end this way, that like many people today, fascinated by the changes in the art world and the growing diversity and the shifting styles and the technical innovations and the breaking apart of the glass boxes which kept so many art forms separate from lived life and ordinary experience, I'm very interested in the idea of engagement with the arts, of the kind of participation that makes possible appreciative fulfillment. I think you probably saw yesterday, I thought it was wonderful news about the new foundation that is going to make up for the Puritanism and narrowness of the National Endowment for the Arts and give support to artists who break through the boundaries with the implication that we need that. We need that look abroad. We need the possibility of entering new kinds of paintings, entering landscapes, entering literary worlds. What does it all have to do with a learning community or even with imagination? There's something enormously important to me in the challenge to us and our students to participate, not simply to contemplate, but to let our energy go out in full encounters with works of art, in transactions that are full of desire, tending toward fulfillment, through our activities of moving, sensing, acting, making, in a continuing awareness of the tension to what between what we imagine and what we constitute as real. We contribute, most especially if we are in a dialogical relation with others, to the making or remaking of the world. I guess I can't end without quoting a little bit from Adrienne Rich, who talks about dread, and talks about how much of art, how much of poetry begins as dread, but reaches out toward possibility, reaches out, never guarantees, gives us some feeling of what it is to live with others, to live in uncertainty, to live at least with a sense of what might be. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is that all right? Or worried? Thank you very much. You want to help me out and ask me questions?
Do you want to take questions right now, or would you be willing to sit for half a second and receive a gift tribute for us?
Oh, sure. I love gifts.
All right?
The one I got last time I was here, I would have liked to bring and show it again. It's the star of my living room. I think people see it from the street and stare up at it. So if it's anything like that, I'll be very...
I don't think I'll be able to see this from the street. Should Maxine sit?
Ooh.
You all right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Just clumsy.
Want to sit here with me for a minute?
Yeah. Thank you.
For those of you who don't know what we're talking about, there's a tradition throughout the arts and education program that students are asked to respond to things they read.
Maxine Greene brings alive everything that's good about the arts with her writings. You never know what connections and associations Professor Greene will make. Her writings and lectures have inspired me to continually push the creative envelope into places I never dreamed were possible. I am, and will always strive to be, a creative presenter. My lectures and teachings are usually composed of multimedia slideshows, music, and an occasional song and dance. Just as Maxine Greene's writings are engaging, meticulous, and aesthetic, so too are my presentations. Maybe. I would like to dedicate a song to Maxine Greene in which I can be expressive and communicate to her how deeply her insights have touched my soul. Maxine Greene has been referred to as the leading luminary of arts education. However, I like to think of her as the Rose. I feel honored and lucky to conclude the John Landrum Bryant Lecture Series this year, honoring one of our heroines of our program. Got to do finger warm-ups. Some say love, it is a river that drowns the tender reed. Some say love, it is a razor that leaves your soul to bleed. Some say love, it is a hunger, an endless aching need. I say love, it is a flower, and you, its only seed. It's the heart afraid of breaking that never learns to dance. It's the dream afraid of waking that never takes a chance. It's the one who won't be taken, who cannot seem to give, and the soul afraid of dying that never learns to live. When the night has been too lonely and the road has been too long, and you think that love is only for the lucky and the strong, just remember in the winter, far beneath the bitter snows, Maxine Greene, you are the sun's love, and forever be the rose.
Thank you. I'm almost breathless because it's so beautiful. Any questions? It's all right. I can stand here.
You want to stand here for questions? Great.
Yes. Did you want to?
Yeah, I'd like to say, I can't even speak. That was, by the way, that was great. You're great. Now, I want to say something. This is very serious. I want you to hear me. You're so modest. You know that question you asked, what does art got to do with what's happening in the world? You did it. If there's a garden full of flowers and weeds and so forth, in the garden there's the rose. That's your quality.
Thank you, my goodness.
Because when you opened up our hearts and minds to what's happening, we are sensitized. We begin to realize we belong in the family. It's another way of lifting us as human beings. It's art. It lifts us. What you did, that speaking was so great. And by the way, what an inspired presentation. I'm saying this to you. You're right here. But sweet one.
We'll do a gig together.
Yes.
What you're doing underneath, listen, this education generally is a forest of stones. You are in there a rose or garden that sweetens our understanding so we live as better human beings.
Thank you, sir.
What you did was the rose. You are the rose. Thank you very much, darling.
Thank you. Time to go home now. I really appreciate what you said. I have to say that I'm full of doubt every time. I asked Jessica, was it all right? You know, you never know. That feeling of incompleteness is very real to me. You know, you're trying and you keep thinking, maybe I'll hit it, maybe I won't hit it, and you never get over it. A lot of people say, still? You still get so worried and uncertain? But I do. And the other thing that's very, I think it's not unusual, people write about me, and I have this feeling that in here is this struggling, wondering, uncertain person, and out there's a puppet or a statue or an object, you know, and you live in this peculiar space between how you feel yourself and what you're trying for and what other people may or may not see. But don't think I'm not grateful. I am grateful, but it doesn't relieve that feeling of not yet. And it's a kind of, maybe it's a blessing to be this old and still think I am what I am not yet. Yes.
I was thinking about teaching art and how it seems as though what I grew up with was teaching that was sort of art for scissors' sake, or art for the hand-eye coordinated only.
Yeah.
And when I read your book, The Dialectic of Freedom, one thing that was still can't get through my head exactly why you talked about individualism and that being the tradition in
Yeah.
the country, and that seems to be tied to the way you taught art. And then you said that something about that community, you know, and cooperation and those kinds of things are what true freedom is about. And I'm thinking about how that connects to teaching art differently.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could speak at all about why that would be freedom is collective.
Yeah. Well, in the first place, you know, like I think many people today, the old idea of individualism, of being separated, autonomous, sort of isolated in some rationally lit world of your own, is very troubling to think about, very troubling. And I think that freedom is not an endowment but an achievement, and that it can only be achieved in a context of relationship, in a context of dialogical relationships. It seems so. When I wrote The Dialectic of Freedom, another thing I was very interested in is the idea. The dialectic is, you know, a tension between opposite things struggle. And I don't believe the dialectic is ever fully resolved. You know, I think that you feel something weighing on you, holding you back, conditioning you, and at the same time you struggle to find a kind of freedom from that. But you can only do that, it still seems to me, in a world of dialogue, a world of relationship, a world where you have the ability to look through other people's eyes. When I took art appreciation, you know, as a child, what I remember is, first of all, I was never asked to enter in. It was like, you know, look at this slide or listen to this theme and you'll join the community of the elite, but don't say anything. And I won't ask you, and there was no discussion in the class. There was only this lonely, self-centered mastery of what the teacher, had in mind. So, one of the things that's been very meaningful to me at the Lincoln Center Institute is to discover the uses of people sharing their responses, arguing sometimes, seeing it differently, but sharing, talking together. about what they loved and what they couldn't stand or what they didn't understand and what they thought was stereotype. That's been the most wonderful part and has opened up facets of works of art I never would have thought could have been open. Yes. Mm. Yeah. I don't think I heard the beginning. I heard the end. What was the point at the end? Was different people have different reactions to works of art. Some love something, some dislike.
Well, I'll give an example, although I know, well, you read from The Hours by Michael Cunningham. And what you read, my reaction was, I don't want to read that book.
Mm. Yeah.
Conservative NEA, and there's something sort of closer to home sometimes.
Yeah.
Maybe more direct criticism.
I hope I heard him. How about the beginning? What did he say at the beginning?
I think he's concerned with where you find affinity groups, that you might find them closer to home than you think, and that they might be dangerous in any scenario.
Where you find what?
The affinity groups.
Oh, the affinity, yeah.
Yeah. And the presumption, for example, of goodness in art that might not be shared, but that might leave some folks out and some folks in.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with art being good, but
Yeah.
particular works of art may also be bad.
Yeah.
And that has to be said too.
Absolutely. I don't know what it means. For example, I don't know how to define art. I don't think there's any real way of defining it. There's only a way of talking about, what you experience. And it's certainly the case that there are works of art that offend us, and that who is the writer, the Frenchman who was a Nazi writer, or I think of racist books and poems that offend you, and that you say cannot come under the rubric of art. What can you do except talk about it, except try to see? I don't think this is probably the kind of example you had in mind, but I was talking to Jessica before about, I have a sort of salon at my house every month for teachers, and we have a text we use and a speaker or somebody will talk with me, and this was The Bluest Eye, and I invited Lisa Delpit to come and talk about her book, Other People's Children, and The Bluest Eye, and the use of imagination. Half the people in the room who were Afro-Americans objected strenuously to the Bluest Eye, to my teaching it. They objected because of the way it confirmed stereotypes, it maintained stereotypes, because of raising the question of incest and so on and so on. What do you do except talk about your different responses to it? What do you do? I try to avoid, if I can, good and bad for works of art. I try. And at the same time, I try to be as honest as I can and say I couldn't stand it. Like people are trying to educate me in rap music now. Little by little, I'm telling the difference between the kind of rap music I can't tolerate and the kind I can enter in. Same with hip-hop. I've given myself a sort of course in hip-hop because when we have conferences of a center that I have, I've always had a hip-hop workshop. And at the beginning, when I thought hip-hop, oh my God, and I don't know if it comes under the category of art. I know it's vibrant, I know it does something, I know it to people different than me, but it's an extraordinarily... The other question you raised, now I don't know if it was a question, when you said that about the mall, it raises something that worries me a lot, you know. In other words, I don't want to be an elitist, you know, and say, oh, you people of the mall, I can't have no stomach for you, because they're going to be most of my students. And in some way, we have to share what we love. We have to share what we care for. And I have to, in some way, be eloquent enough or caring enough or passionate enough to talk about what I love and attentive enough to listen to what they love. I don't know any other way to do it, even though I'd like to say, shut up and listen to Mozart, you know. Yes. Tell me what she said.
I'd like to hear about the Lincoln Center Institute and the service it provides for teachers and artists.
Well, it was started 25 years ago or something when Lincoln Center got a big grant from the Humanities Endowment to send artists to schools and do things like perception and sensitivity. And then they came to Teachers College, and I guess I said, why isn't it about art? Lincoln Center is a place where, you know, so we developed a program for public school teachers who come for 3 weeks in the summer, who work at workshops with professional teaching artists, with dancers, with directors, with musicians, not to put on performances, but to engage with the medium, with the idea that if they do that, they can attend to the performances we have, you know, with with their bodies, with their nervous systems, as well as cognitively. Just as an example, say we're going to have a Martha Graham dance group performing. There'll be a teaching artist in the workshop who will try to get the teachers involved in the particular kind of movement, the pelvic-based movement of Martha Graham, so that when they see Lamentations or Appalachian Spring or whatever it is, they can experience it differently. You know, well, this is a marriage and Puritan. They experience it again physically, emotionally, and I keep saying, the more you know, the more you see. And so we've tried from the beginning to have always 2 performances of everything. Like one of my funny memories of it, some of you know George Crumb's The Ancient Voices of Children, a musical piece with a soprano singing into piano and a little boy reciting a Lorca poem and a saw and a sort of a beat. I forgot now, but after it was first played, the teachers, I said they all wore plastic curlers. They were like people wearing pink plastic. This isn't music, this is just noise and so on. But when they worked with their teaching artists, some of whom had them move, and some of them doing ensemble work, some of them looking at the notation, at the quotations from Mahler, from Bach, and so. The next time they heard it, it was fabulous for them. They entered into it, and Schirmer's sold out of Ancient Voices. Remember that. Doesn't always happen, but that's the idea. The workshop, the performance, and I'm a talking head there. I'm lucky enough to be called, whatever that means, philosopher in residence. So he keeps my questions alive. And obviously in the fall term, winter term, performances and teaching artists do go to the schools. and you know, create somewhat the same situation in the school. Yes.
I love your quote about facts. You never know about that ideas. And I'm sitting at a meeting that rounding out is something I always ask.
Will you help me again?
Yeah.
Tell me.
Allison, check me if I haven't got this right. She's interested in the origins of the quote about facts to be routed out. She heard you say that before. She wonders what the source of it is.
Yeah.
She assumes that your use of it means that the way the facts get rounded out is through the process of the imagination and interpretation. And she wants to know, she'd like you to comment a little bit on how that process happens, of understanding is made out of facts, and steps being taken. Art is not fiction,
No.
but it's more real. The use of metaphor being perhaps truer than the actual art making the true clearer, even as it feels a step away from it. Is that right, Allison?
It's from thank you. I wasn't sure. I got a tin ear anyway, I think. The always in a big room. I don't know why. I do know why, I guess.
Maybe people can stand up.
It comes from Dewey's Philosophy and Civilization, which I think he wrote in 1931. And it does have very much to do with Dewey's view of something reaching forward into some kind of a space, some kind of possibility again. And I think he meant that facts all by themselves, without looking at their implications, without looking at the context, without, as he says, imagining possibilities, intellectual possibilities, are dead things. You know, even empirically proven facts are dead things if you don't try to imagine what follows. And what was it about the arts and not fiction?
I think the arts making the actual more real, and metaphor, for example, perhaps even a more accurate picture of the world. Non-artistic media.
I'm not sure if it's more accurate, but I know it's more. I don't know if I can turn to the arts, even as Conrad said, for that vision of truth which you forgot to ask. But I do know that the arts allow for alternatives, allow for ways of seeing that are alternative to each other, and therefore make the inquiry more profound. But I don't find truth in the arts. I find questions, I find possibility, I find joy, I find passion. I don't look for truth in the arts. It would be nice, but I don't.
And Alison, what you're asking is the ambivalence that you talked about, that the arts allow for, somehow more descriptive than the dead data points, as it were.
Yeah, I think so. I think the ambivalence is so human. I think we want to stay where we are. Like we want to be comfortable. And the ambivalence is, I don't want to look beyond. I don't want to take a chance. I should have brought a poem about that. You know, how nice it is to stay in bed with the crumbs of your breakfast all around you while the taxi is honking at the curb, you know. But I think everybody feels that way. I do, you know, lots of times. But then I know I can't live that way comfortably.
Could you stand up, please, and say as loud as
I may be not too welcome.
Could you come forward?
As long as Jessica helps me.
What you said made me think. Also, things don't just happen.
Yeah.
And art, I was thinking, when you began with Dustin Hoffman, he had to put a splint in his boot to make himself live.
Mm-hmm.
And that to write a poem isn't so easy, and to make a picture isn't so simple.
No.
And to make all your thoughts isn't so simple. So I was thinking about how art is, anyway, this idea of what Marianne Moore said, the real frog, making poetry is a real frog in an imaginary garden.
Yeah, imaginary toads yeah, real toads in an imaginary garden.
Yes. This is not so easy to make an imaginary toad.
No.
And so I think the kind of extraordinary knowledge and skill that comes to be, that then we behold, become part of, is something that is the engagement. Is that what we engage with?
Part of it. When I think of engagement, I think of, knowing enough, say, about a poem to move inside of it, not to read it as a document. But what you said is so important, because there still is the sort of peculiar idea of inspiration. You're inspired, or you get very drunk, or you get high on drugs, and you write the perfect piece, where we know it's almost agony to create something beautiful, something that will communicate, and I think it isn't realized, to shape it, to hone it, to make it speak. Even if I write something like this, which is not a work of art, it's hard. It's hard trying to develop it, in a certain sequence, but and I don't want to take a formalist point of view. It's shaping in a way that communicates in such a fashion as to speak to all kinds of people. One of the wonderful things that really happened in the last month or so was the poetry. We had a poetry month. Did you have that too? And I think the work Robert Pinsky is doing and asking people their favorite poem. And I was lucky enough to be asked to talk in the Poets Week at Poets House in New York, and talked about poetry and literacy. Again, I was sort of confirmed in my feeling about the mystery, the inexplicable, and the marvelous, really indescribable skill and knowledge that it takes to write any kind of poem. It was a wonderful experience because, it was an experience with passionate craftsmen. And I never quite will get over it because of that. Yes.
You know about Reggio Emilia?
Yes.
Would you comment on the education of very young children and the involvement of the arts?
I don't know enough about it, but I'm terribly impressed by what I do know. Talking to people who've been to Italy and seeing a wonderful exhibit at Scholastic magazine about 2 years ago. I don't know. All I do know is the idea of allowing children to play with words, to play with, like Jessica wrote that wonderful, I didn't read it yet, but I have to assume it's wonderful, painting with her grandson. Or for example, I have a friend who, instead of, it sounds a little fancy, but it worked well. Instead of using video games to entertain her 4-year-old, used Shakespeare plays, which have color and noise and sound, and the child was fascinated because it unleashes so much fascination with the world and allows that. putting an imprint on the world, which seems so important. The other thing I think is so important about children's writing now and children's poetry and children's drawing is, you know, we realize what the search for meaning in a child is, what children know, what they intuit, what they fear, what they're horrified by. And when I was a child, people didn't think that. You really were empty vessels. And, you know, if the conversation got a little interesting, my mother would say, go upstairs and do your homework, because you couldn't understand. But when you see the you all have seen the poetry in the public schools now, see the poetry in the inner city, you're discovering something about childhood that I think none of us realized in the day of innocence and romanticism. It's complex, it's troubling. Maybe one of the problems in the high schools is that we haven't noticed the darkness. We thought of things in terms of pink and white. That may be part of it. Yeah.
Really try to find out how children and adolescents really
I know. We haven't wanted to know. Yes.
How do you think the whole movement of frameworks and standards is going to affect the artistry of both teaching and learning?
I think it's going to affect it if standards are used as a uniform standard, as an imposition of a terrible kind of bourgeois sameness on every school. On the other hand, I know, I've talked to principals and teachers in some of New York's very troubled schools, and the idea of standard is important to them, but not that way. The idea of living up to something, of being expected to live up to something. I talk about it as an idea of oughtness. If you can somehow give a child a feeling of reaching beyond, of trying. But the idea, the way standards are talked about now frightens me, really frightens me, because it quashes all the things we've been saying about children's voices and children's imprints on the world. I think the establishment is afraid of that. And I connect it with something that makes me very bitter and very cynical, and that is the lack of talk about art or imagination in what is called school reform, and now called school renewal. Maybe renewal will bring in the arts. Who knows? Yeah.
I have a question. In a lot of the presentations that I see about the art, people will say there's been, many studies done on the effects of drama, on intelligence, and music, and then there's dance. And they'll say, well, there's not much written, not much know about dance. And I was wondering why you think that is. Why is dance the most marginalized of all
it's so funny because in some ways, and I'm not a dancer, but I am a lover of dance, I think dance is the first art. It's fun, partly because of the way it appears in every culture, and partly because it's the body in space and time where it all begins, And the only thing I can think of is there are very few, as you say, very little written, and people don't know what to make of it. They associate it with the entertaining, with the trivial, where for me, if it's important to think of embodiment, if it's important to feel yourself in the world, in the landscapes of things, to feel yourself in space and time, dance has to be, to me, the first art. And if you look at cultures, it is. There's no culture without dance somewhere at its center. I don't know the answer to what you say. I just know if you're a dancer, it's very hard to get tenure because you have no place to publish.
One thing I want to say, I hope you don't mind, I said too much already. See that road? I'm going to make this point.
My dog.
When this gentleman asked about art,
I guess we could
the thing
stop.
about you is there's something in you, a quality, a certain sensibility, which reminds us of things. This sensibility, it's like under the snow of life, the winter, there's this like the rose, there's in you a quality. It communicates, come through you. Whatever you're discussing, you awaken us to the wonder of things, the fragility of
Oh, how wonderful. That's what I would like.
Is it clear enough? It's like the rose under the ground. It sweetens the whole garden, even if it's not seen. That's you. That quality inside of you. And that communicates, it touches the realm of the affect. And we fall in love with that idea. We're more generous and loving in the world. And that's why I thought that's...
You make me glad I came, gladder than I was before.
And why don't we end with that eloquence?
Exactly.